Imagine a time in the history of world when insects were as big as cattle and they were coming to eat you. Oh no. Okay, it's kind of a scary thought, right? Like, how could insects be that big in time? Wonder about this. How could insects be that big? Another thing I want to show that will blow your mind. Do you know that there was an era in which 3 mass extinctions happened all together? One of that mass extinction was one of the strongest mass extinctions to ever happen. Many animals died in that mass extinction. All of these questions have their answers lied in the very book of the Paleozoic Era. The Paleozoic Era is an interesting era. You might think it's kind of boring since it has no dinosaurs or saber-toothed cats in it, but it doesn't matter, because there are other creatures that are way more interesting than dinosaurs or saber-toothed tigers. You must hear, okay? So, what is the Paleozoic Era, and when did the Paleozoic Era begin? You ask, right? You see, the Paleozoic Era began 450 million years ago after the end of the Precambrian Era. If you want to hear what is the Precambrian Era, then please check out our previous video on Cosmic Genesis episode 3. I'll put the link in the description down below. Now, let's get back to the Paleozoic Era. Eras are divided into smaller periods, and each period ends after some tremendous event. So the Paleozoic Era, it is divided into many periods, and the first period began 450 million years ago. This period was called the Cambrian period. I have explained about the Cambrian period in our previous episode, but just to give a brief explanation of the Cambrian Era, the Cambrian Era had an event on it called the Cambrian explosion. And what was the Cambrian explosion? It was a time when bacteria transformed into multicellular organisms, and these multicellular organisms changed the way how living things inhabited the planet, and life became more complex, not boring bacteria or things like that. After the Cambrian period comes another period, the second period of the Paleozoic Era, and this period is called the Ordovician period. The Ordovician period was marked by another explosion in the diversity of multicellular life forms. The Cambrian, how did the Cambrian end? There was a drop in oxygen levels in the ocean, which caused a tiny mini extinction. This mini extinction marked the end of the Cambrian Era and started the Ordovician Era. If you don't know what an extinction is, let me tell you. An extinction is an event when a huge number of animals die out altogether due to some natural phenomenon. Now, we come to the Ordovician period. The oxygen levels rise up again, and just like the Cambrian explosion, another group of animals diversify. But the Ordovician period has many new, more and complex creatures. We have a fish called ostracoderms. Ostracoderms is a fish that has a backbone. By this point, not a single animal had any bones in them, but this fish having backbones, this means that this fish was a vertebrate. An animal with a backbone is called a vertebrate, and this fish became the ancestor of all the coming vertebrates. Humans, we ourselves are vertebrates. So this fish was basically, ostracoderms was our ancestor, but poor ostracoderms was jawless, so it mostly fed on plankton, which is the basis for every food chain in the marine oceans. And the poor ostracoderms also got eaten by a more bigger cephalopod. What is a cephalopod? Do you know about squids? Animals like octopus or giant squids, they have tentacles and soft bodies. So these squids are the part of a group of animals known as cephalopods. And one of the most ancient cephalopods to dominate the ocean were the Carboniferous. in the Ordovician period. They mostly fed on ostracoderms, and they had inhabited the more deeper portions of the ocean. But then the Ordovician period also ended, and the Ordovician period ended with the first ever mass extinction of our planet. A mass extinction is a type of extinction in which a huge number, almost every animal on the planet has died. Only a few numbers survives, or maybe they die too, but that may be the final extinction. But let's get back to the subject. So the thing is that in the Ordovician period, how did it end? Well, you see, during the Ordovician period, the plants in the ocean were mostly plankton, seaweed, seagrass, things like that. But then there was one type of plant. Sadly, we don't know what kind of plant that is. However, that plant was a microscopic plant which had a lot of resemblance to mosses and lichens. So this plant, it became curious and started to leave the ocean and get into the land. By this point, the only continent on our planet was the Nuna continent. We explained it in our previous episode. So what happened was that plants started to leave the ocean and started to climb on the wasteland of Nuna. At that time, the only land in the world was a volcanic wasteland. There were no fertile soil in the planet at that time. Everything was mostly volcanic ash, rocks, lava, things like that. Grey, everything was grey. Suddenly these plants started to inhabit this wasteland and turned this wasteland into a forest. These were the first ever forests of our planet. And these plants were very successful at gaining control over terrestrial lands. But the only problem was that these plants may have been too successful, because you all know that plants absorb carbon dioxide in order to breathe. Because the population of these plants was so huge, a lot of carbon dioxide got inhaled by these plants. And most of this carbon dioxide dropped. The levels of the carbon dioxide dropped by 60% in the atmosphere. 60% is a lot. So that led to the world's first ever ice age. And this ice age led to the freezing of all oceans, which resulted in the death of many animals. The first ever mass extinction of this whole world, the Ordovician-Silurian mass extinction. The only animals that did survive were the ones that lived in the most depthest part of the ocean. Yeah, they lived in the depth, the abyss of the ocean. So these animals were the only ones that survived. But this mass extinction led to the end of the Ordovician period and started a new period which was called the Silurian period. The Silurian period, well, nothing really interesting happened in the Silurian period apart from a few things. Number one, most of the lobe-finned fishes started to come towards the shore. Just like the plants, these fishes started to leave the ocean and try to get up on the ground. This resulted in the first ever amphibians of this world. They were tetrapods. These animals were tetrapods, and tetrapods are animals that have 4 limbs. And they use these limbs to walk on the land. These fishes developed lungs for breathing and became the amphibians. Amphibians are animals like frogs and salamanders. Amphibians are basically animals that could live on both water and land. So they start to inhabit the land as well. And just like that, animals also start to conquer the land. Back in the waters, however, a new type of fish has developed. Ostracoderms have now developed spikes and armor to protect themselves from sea scorpions that were the biggest enemies at that time. But they could not have the power to bite the scorpions back. One animal did have to, and in that fish was known as the placoderms. Placoderms have a very bony skeletal skull, face. But I must say skull because it looks more like a skull and it's very creepy to me. My biggest nightmare. you must see the image of Ducleostis. Ducleostis was one of the biggest placoderms to inhabit the oceans at that time in the Silurian period, and more fishes started to develop backbones. But then another mini mass extinction led to the end of the Silurian period, and what happened in this one was that the oxygen levels dropped again in the ocean, which resulted in a lot of cephalopods and other deep ocean living animals to die out. The oxygen in the ocean levels started to rise up again, and this resulted in the Devonian period. In the Devonian period, well, nothing interesting happened in the ocean, but a lot was happening on the land. The plants that inhabited the land suddenly have grown to redwoods, and redwoods are one of the tallest trees in the world. The tallest tree currently in the world, Hyperion, which is 200 plus meters tall, is a redwood. And redwoods date back to the Devonian period. The Devonian period also led to a huge burst of animals that live on land, the terrestrial animals. And what happened now was that amphibians have finally become very land-like and only laid their eggs in the water. But the Devonian forests were had a lot of oxygen in them. The oxygen levels suddenly started to rise up, and suddenly insects also started to leave the ocean and come onto the land. And I must say, these insects got huge. For example, the ancient dragonflies had a wingspan of 60 centimeters. 60 centimeters! Like, it's as long as my arms. That's really tall or giant wingspan. So insects were really giant because they needed a lot of oxygen, since oxygen was too much at that time in the atmosphere. But then another mini mass extinction due to volcanic and seismic activity caused the Devonian period to also end, and we come to the Carboniferous period. What happened in the Carboniferous period was that the amphibians suddenly started into another group of animals called ammonoids. Ammonoids are basically amphibians that do not live in the water. They can live on land, and they lay eggs that have a lot of nutrients inside them and are hard shelled to protect them in dry weather. This was a huge crucial adaptation, since at this very time all the continents were merging together to form the giant supercontinent of Pangaea. And I must say, at the very heart of Pangaea, the moisture from the oceans could not reach the inland areas of Pangaea, which resulted in those areas to become vast dry deserts with no water. So this was a huge crucial adaptation for the ammonite. While other animals struggled, the ammonite suddenly started to revolutionize, and the ammonite suddenly divided into two groups, the reptiles and the sypnacids. The reptiles, as we all know them, are scaly, lay leather eggs, normal reptiles, lizards, crocodiles, turtles, things like that. The synapsids, on the other hand, were a bit more interesting, because you see, synapsids are a cross between reptiles and mammals. They lay leather eggs. They do lay eggs. They have scaly. They do have scaly skin, but they have a bit of milk in their bellies, and they also walk like mammals, or more like a cross between a cat and a lizard. So synapsids were basically the ancestors of mammals and other reptiles. Synapsids included animals like dipterodotes and the cattle-sized Paleosaurus, while also other animals like the Gorgonopsid. And Gorgonopsid was a carnivore that hunted the Paleosaurs at that time. So again, a very crucial evolution that resulted in the food chain to grow, spread, and just like that make a stable ecosystem. But then we come to the final period of the Paleozoic Era, and this period is known as the Permian period. By this point, synapsids and reptiles had conquered the land, but then suddenly something really bad happened. volcanoes, something that we forgotten some time ago, started to explode really rapidly. Seismic activity started to form and these volcanoes suddenly started to explode with lava. The ash from these volcanoes were poisonous and had a lot of unbreathable poisonous gases that could destroy your lungs. These gases started to form as smoke and ash, and they entered into the atmosphere and mixed with the clouds. These clouds rained acidic rain, and this acidic rain suddenly flooded. The acid flood it is called. So we have an unbreathable atmosphere, lot of seismic activity, volcanic eruptions and acidic flooding. Result, death. Okay, so suddenly acid rain started to spread over the land, and smoky clouds started to cover the sky. So photosynthesis suddenly stopped and plants stopped growing. Just like that, herbivores also died, and the carnivores that feed on the herbivores died too alongside them. And these acidic rains further even stopped their chances of survival. Acidic rain entered into their throats and started to damage any part of the body they came in contact with. Smoky air destroyed their lungs, and suddenly 96% of every single animal on this world died. Only 4% remained. In the marine ocean, 75% of all fishes died. This period was called the Permian Mass Extinction, and the Permian Mass Extinction is also nicknamed the Great Dying. This was the biggest mass extinction in the history of paleontology. But then suddenly survivors came from the ashes. A lot of tiny caves were made from which the surviving reptiles came. The synapsids were wiped out, only the reptiles survived. These reptiles would later grow on to become a huge species and one of the most famous species to ever colonize our planets, the dinosaurs. And the dinosaurs would also mark the start of the Mesozoic era. But we would talk about the Mesozoic era later in our next video. But now I want to ask a final question before we conclude this video. Tell me, what is your favorite synapsid and what are synapsids? If you know about these things, please comment down and I'll be very happy to see your comments. Okay? Now be sure to like this video and share this video and stay tuned for more updates. I'll be meeting you next time very soon. So grab your velociraptors, ride on it. We are going to dive in the Mesozoic era. But for now, the video is ended and I hope you are very fine. Bye.